I have the privilege of leading the National Center for Community Schools, which works with communities all over the country to start up, to sustain, and to support community schools at all stages of development. I'm actually coming to you from New York City, where it's a little bit later and much, much colder, but being here with you has given me lots of warmth and positive energy. So I appreciate this opportunity. You know, one of the first lessons that we at the National Center teach folks about community schools is that community schools are a strategy, not a program. And what we mean is that there's not necessarily a checklist of programs and services that you have to have, right? Instead, it's a strategy that takes into account the values, the experiences, the voices, all kinds of data, and much, much more of its many stakeholders, and jointly makes decisions about how we will leverage the assets and opportunities that we have, and then address the needs that we know exist in our community. No two community schools are exactly identical because no two communities are exactly identical. And this is why a needs and assets assessment is so critical. So on this first slide here, you'll see that we're defining it as a process. It's one really important tool in understanding the landscape, in setting priorities, and in making decisions. And the truth is that sometimes we need a more comprehensive and inclusive approach to making really good decisions. And I'll share an example on this next slide. So here is what you might consider to be a typical meeting of a school leadership team. And here they are, they're meeting as they often do, and they're trying to decide what to work on as a school community. And so now let's listen into their conversation. If we go to the person on the left here, you'll see that this person is worried about the sugary drinks in the cafeteria, which, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. That's a real concern. We should talk about that. And that character education, the next person here is saying that character education must be added to the curriculum. Hard to argue with that. Really, really good point. The next person is talking about standards-based testing being better than normed reference testing. I'm not even sure exactly what that means. I'm sure Anna knows what that means. I'm not really sure, but it sounds pretty important, and maybe we should listen to that person. We have someone else here who's concerned that parents aren't adequately involved. And I think every school I've worked with is always trying to work on engaging and involving more parents. So really good point. And the last person here is saying that, well, by law, all children must be above average, which as a former math teacher, that's mathematically impossible. But you know what? Let's talk about it. Let's really sort of figure out what's going on here. And so if you want, you can put this in the chat. What else is going on in this cartoon? What else is happening in this story? What else do you see going on? If you look closely at the bottom of this image, you'll see that we have, yes, the kids. Thank you, Brenda. You'll see that at the very bottom here, we have a young person who is screaming for his life because the school is both on fire and sinking at the same time. Now, it's a cartoon. It's kind of funny, right? And then it's not. And then it's not funny. Because the fact is that we have many schools, there are many, many schools that have these kinds of burning, sinking issues that are being ignored. And they've been ignored for a very long time, right? Too often, we're not doing a good enough job creating the space to really understand what's going on, to invite additional voices into the process, to look at a wide set of qualitative and quantitative data to inform how we will move forward as a school community. And so in absence of that, without having that young person's voice heard, without having other people who know what's happening in our school community be a part of this process, what we end up working on are the personal agendas of those who already have a seat at the table. Now, it may be that we really do need to work on sugary drinks, right? Or parent involvement. But let's be certain that we know that that is the priority that we need to work on. Let's think about what opportunities we have before us to act. And let's make sure that we have additional voices that are involved in this process. all of it leading to action. And on this next slide, let's talk a little bit about what action can lead to, right? So, and by the way, these processes go by many different names. It could be called the needs and assets assessment. It could be a needs and opportunities assessment, a needs assessment and resource inventory. We don't care what you call it. We just think everyone needs to do this. And so if this chart, I think, is also trying to describe that there is really action involved in this work. We're not just doing this so we can write a report. This should lead to action. And if you look at this chart here, at the end of a process, you're going to learn a couple things. You're going to learn exactly what all the current needs are in your community. And you're also going to have a sense of what all the opportunities are, the things that you're currently doing, the things that you have accessible to you, available to you. And so the real goal here is to, if you look in the middle of this slide, is you want to see this sweet spot. So if you can advance the animation here, there's a sweet spot that's really, really good news, right? What's happening in the sweet spot in the middle is that there are a number of needs that you have identified that you are currently meeting. That's awesome. High fives all around. This is really good news. You figured out that there are some things that you have going on that are actually of service and really helping people. That's fantastic. Now, if we look at the left side of this chart, you also will notice that there are a bunch of needs you have that are unmet. And that may feel like it's a little bit upsetting, but it's actually kind of exciting because now you have a really good sense. If you've done a good job in the process, you now know exactly what you need to work on, which partners you need to engage, which funding you need to go after. It really helps you to prioritize what action is going to look like. So it really gives you kind of it charges the school to move forward. But it's what's on the right side of this chart is a little bit more difficult because what the right side of the chart shows, if you look at all the way on the right, is that there are actually some things that you as a school community are providing that nobody needs. So, and I think if you think about this, you probably have some examples of this, things that we have just done forever because we always do them. Or sometimes you have the principal that can't say no, even though we're not really sure if that's the right thing for us to be doing. Or there's some pressure coming from a funder and you feel obligated to do that, even though you know it's not really meeting a need. That is not what good community schools do. Instead, again, the goal is to make that sweet spot even bigger. And one way to do that is to think about how we shift the capacity we have on the right over to the left, which can be done many different ways. One of them is through continuous improvement. You may want to strengthen the quality of the programs that you're offering to make them meet needs. You may want to think about whether you're engaging the right populations with those programs. Maybe instead of working with the fourth graders, we should work with the third graders, for example, depending on what the program is, of course. There are many ways to do this, or maybe we haven't set that program up for success, and we need to do a better job of providing them with information and support and relationships. So it helps you think about and helps you organize your thinking about how to move those programs into a place where they're actually much more connected, and they're actually meeting a need that you've identified as a school community. So in the interest of time, and we have a lot to get through today, I guess I'll share just one more slide here, which is a way just to try to capture the lessons that we have learned from doing this work now for decades. And our process has changed over time, but these lessons really have been pretty consistent throughout all of our work with partners around the country. And I'll just quickly talk about each one. The first one is building a strong team. And one really important takeaway here is that this cannot be done by one person. There has to be a group of people involved in this work. Secondly, I know a lot of people think that a needs assessment is all about doing focus groups, and that's all they sort of focus on. And yes, that's important, but we think that you actually need to have some focus first. It's not a good starting point. We think first you want to do a little bit of learning about what's going on and then get to focus groups, and I can talk more about that later. We want to ask folks to avoid analysis paralysis. Sometimes we hear about these processes that go on for weeks and months, and nothing really happens. That's not helpful. We want to get to action as quickly as we can. Be sure to give and receive. You'll find yourselves asking many, many people for information. And a huge mistake that we see people do sometimes is that they ask tons of folks for information to inform their needs assessment, but they never go back and tell those people what we learned and engage those folks in what comes next. So both give and receive. And then finally, lather, rinse, repeat. This is something that you don't just do one time and you put this down and you don't think again about needs and assets for 2 or 3 years. What we're finding is that the most effective community schools are regularly doing this process. And it doesn't have to be a huge process every time, but especially right now, given all that we know about the pandemic and how much it is shifting every day, even if we thought we knew what was going on 2 months ago, I can guarantee you the needs have changed, the opportunities have changed. It's so important that we make this an ongoing conversation. And with that, I will conclude, and I'm looking forward to the panel later on.